And welcome to Tech Connects, NICE's podcast where we dig into the topics on tech hiring, recruiting, and careers that matter to you. I'm your host, Nick Kolakowski. Our guest today is James Raybould, who's head of Turing Intelligence at Turing, a company building AI solutions for a variety of organizations. In addition, Turing also helps clients train large language models, or LLMs, which power the chatbots that millions of people use every day. James's team leverages the latest research to build AI systems that help businesses transform. If there's one thing we can say about the digital revolution these days, it's on steroids thanks to AI. I really wanted to talk to James because of his fascinating insights into how companies are adopting AI, the kinds of AI skills that tech professionals might need to succeed in this rapidly changing world, and the future of AI itself, which will include things like software agents working in sync to help humans accomplish their daily tasks. So let's listen in. So James, thank you for being on. I'm really was just excited about the prospect of talking to you because there's so many. We have so many discussions on a regular basis with software developers and other tech professionals who are, if they're not involved in AI, they're obviously sort of under pressure to figure out how to best integrate AI into their current processes and their tech stacks and so on. And so I just want to talk about. I guess I want to start off by talking about kind of the technical challenges of integrating AI into, I mean, not just people who work for complex enterprises, but also small to medium sized businesses where can also have very complex needs. And sort of people who are facing down the need to integrate AI, kind of the most in demand skills that they're going to need for those integrations, and whether it's legacy systems, cloud infrastructure, and so on. What are your thoughts on that?
I think what might be helpful as a starting point is what's the problem you're trying to solve? 'Cause I think what I noticed, I'm sure what you notice when you talk to people is there's this pressure, whether it's from the board, whether it's from the CEO, whether it's from someone at a university, they've seen ChatGPT is a release, and now, oh my gosh, we have, Claude 3.7, or we have 4.5, all the Gemini stuff as well. So I think that's kind of this. So I think what happens is people start with must use AI, have Hammer, must use AI. But AI is fantastic. In no way am I coming on this show and saying AI isn't fantastic. It is. But what happens is people start with must deploy AI. Instead, I think what works better, and we find with our clients too, is what's the business problem I'm trying to solve? What's the workflow? What's the goal? What's the outcome of it might be? And then from there, you try and figure out where is this incredibly compelling new technology, probably a large language model, where can it help me? And so I think what happens is there's so much pressure and so much speed that people go straight to must do X. But if you start with, well, why am I doing X? And what will I get if I do X? Then I think you'll find it's much easier to be like, oh, wow, I can see for this use case that using a large language model is incredibly compelling. Actually, for this one, it's not. But if you try and use it everywhere, then you get stuck. And so I think kind of starting with like, what's the goal, as a human first, or as a company first, and then figuring out, I think what I used to work at Bain as an example, and what I would sometimes see in LinkedIn as well, I would sometimes see people would take a technology out approach, not a customer in approach. So I have this cool new tech. What can it do? Instead of what is the problem you're trying to solve? What technology do I need to use? And sometimes you need to use AI. Sometimes you don't. And so I guess I start with like, what's the business problem to be solved? And then figuring out which tool, which system, which LLM, et cetera, makes sense. And the answer isn't always that it makes sense. The answer sometimes like, you know what? We don't need AI for this one. It's not helpful.
Yeah.
Is that a helpful starting point?
Yeah, no, that absolutely is. And it makes me think, I mean, Turing has done so much AI training with so many companies, large and small. And so when you're approaching those clients and you're talking to their tech staff and so on, in terms of that familiarity with the tools and processes and like, will this AI widget help solve this massive internal issue or whatever they're facing? I mean, are you finding that these tech professionals are generally starting from zero, or is there like a certain baseline of AI knowledge that a lot of people tend to have kind of going in? I'm just curious because even a year ago, it seemed like AI knowledge was, obviously people knew what ChatGPT was and so on, but people really hadn't adopted methodologies and tools and so on. And now it seems like that's changing just because the industry and the economy are driving people in that direction. So I'm just curious about kind of how you're finding people.
Well, and we have kind of an interesting situation where, I'll briefly introduce Turing. I'm sure most of your
Mhm, mhm,
audience isn't familiar with Turing. And the reason it's interesting for us is because we work with the large language models themselves. So we work with I won't give client names, but all the products that you probably use every day, we work with them. And so for those folks, they not only understand AI, they're building the models that we all used to use AI. I mean, to say they're on a scale of 1 to 100, they're at 100. They
mhm.
are literally building those
Yeah.
no a 4.5 or a 3.7 again, etc. So they couldn't understand AI anymore
Mhm.
because they are building the future.
Yeah.
Then we also work with customers and say who come to us and are like, hey, I know you work with all these frontier models, all these AI labs. You know where the future is going. What does the future mean for me? I run supply chain, I run recruiting, I run marketing, I run a business unit, what I might be. And that's where I think to your question, you have really the full spectrum. You have some people who are 90 and they've automated their whole life. They've built a bunch of automations. They can tell you the difference between 4.5 and 3.7 and Gemini this, Gemini that. Some people are, on this end of the spectrum are like, I think ChatGPT is a product, right? And so what we need to do is meet customers and meet individuals where they are. And so I think, I'm obviously very biased. I would say on that 100 spectrum, I don't know, I'm certainly north of 70, and I'm probably, to be honest, like north of 90, depending on where you want to
That'd
put me on
be
the
a safe
spectrum.
assumption. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, but it's important to understand, like, it's a journey. And I think, there's definitely some people who think this is a fad, and I respect that as a perspective. I don't agree with it as a perspective, but I respect it. And then
Yeah.
there's some people who are probably even more, they're like 110, and they're basically like, why does humanity exist? Because it will only be run by machines in like 2 years. And like, yeah,
AGI is
I'm
going to be here in 5 months. Yeah.
exactly. And so, we can discuss when's AGI coming and all that fun stuff if you'd like. But so I think what's interesting is, given that I'm more on the 90 end of the spectrum than the 0 end of the spectrum, my job is to work with folks and to gradually coax them along. AI is not like, hey, you must use this or you will lose your job tomorrow. You must use this or your company will get behind that. That's way too extreme. But I do believe that the individuals who embrace this new powerful technology, the teams that do the same thing, the companies that do the same thing, I believe, will prosper and succeed more than those who don't. And so it's my job to try and figure out, as we go into companies, for example, what are the right use cases? How can I help this company be more successful? My goal would be that customers who work with Turing are more successful than customers who don't.
Related to that, one question I had was so, and I frequently talk to younger tech professionals and software developers who are at the very beginning of their careers, and many of them are just happening to graduate school or they're landing their first position or what have you at this very auspicious moment when it comes to AI. And not only them, but also older developers as well. But there's this sort of curiosity about where all this is going with regard to how AI is going to sort of fundamentally change the nature of software engineering and a lot of these tech jobs. And, you have people who think that within a couple of years, software engineers will become prompt engineers, and that you're going to say something and use natural language, and that you're going to give, hey, presto, get an amazing piece of software that's been QA'd and everything that's absolutely perfect. And then you have people who assume that even if your chatbot is capable of spitting out your code snippets and everything like that, that there's still going to be a lot of coding and technical knowledge, especially for kind of more esoteric network engineering functions or so on. I mean, how do you think that's evolving? How do you think things will become specialized or generalized as time goes on? And again, this is a gut check. I mean, who knows how it's going to go? I'm just curious
Yeah, no,
because
of
you're
course.
so
Yeah,
immersed
I
in it.
mean,
Yeah.
first of all, I don't have the answer, nor do you, and nor does anyone.
No.
If that makes
No
sense.
one. Yeah.
So we're figuring it out together. I think what's interesting, so when I worked at LinkedIn for a long time, when I worked at LinkedIn, I led a bunch of product teams. I'd work with engineering teams, of course, very closely. And sometimes their work would be, we'd give them a very, very detailed, product requirements doc or PRD, and they would essentially execute it. and it would be hard work and it might be fun. Like it was much more like, here's what to do, and I go do it. I think what's interesting now is I think that we're evolving to is I think that it should become not that it isn't empowering to do work like that, but it's a little bit more like the PM says, please do this. The engineer does a hard thing, but they do that. I think in a world now where it's easier and easier to code, whether that's, using a Bolt or a Lovable or a Replit, one of these kind of more like a prototyping tool, or whether you're using Cursor or Windsurf or one of the new, the more powerful tools for quote real coding. Not that prototyping isn't real coding, but you get the idea.
Yeah, no, yeah, yeah.
I think the role of an engineer gets more empowered because again, I think before you had to almost have someone tell you what to do, and then you have in certain cases, and then you would have to kind of go execute. Now I think you can. I think the skill has become less. I spent 4 years in undergrad and 2 years in a master's degree learning incredible Java skills or .NET skills or whatever the skills might be, which are still important. But I think again back to that conversation we had earlier. What is the outcome I'm trying to drive? And in this case, yes, maybe this case I need to go and dig in to write some really detailed code. Or maybe I can very, very quickly use one of these prototyping tools, or maybe over time, using that cursor, cursor in theory is I just hit tab a lot. Like, if you think a couple of years out, I kind of know what I want to do. It's like, I think I know what you're doing, James. Tab. Yep, that's what I want. Yep, tab. So it becomes kind of, I go from writing long strings of code to essentially just tabbing my way through the app, building the app. I think that will continue. But again, I see that as like very, very empowering because it now means I, as an engineer, I'm not one small piece of a big machine. I get to build the broader vision myself, and I can do it so much faster. I mean, I'm sure. Are you a techie? Are you a coder yourself, or do you?
I'm an extremely bad coder, which is why I'm an editor and a podcaster. But I can if you told me to build, like at one point, I built a clone of Flappy Bird. That's about my level of coding expertise for what it's worth. So
Nice.
I can certainly, somebody like me, I could see in a couple of years with my more rudimentary coding knowledge using an incredibly sophisticated AI tool to maybe do something that's a little bit more advanced and
I think
complex.
meaningfully more.
Yeah.
I mean, if you use a Replit or Love, I mean, again, these are not yet what I'll call enterprise grade tools, but they will be, and Cursor certainly is. And so I think back to your question, um, you know, I think more and more AI makes us become sort of like editors. What I mean by editor is, there's kind of actually, more than, way more than I do about editing than anyone I'm going to talk to. And so, obviously to be a great editor, you need to be a good writer as well. And so in this case, you need to understand enough about the underlying structures, underlying in this case, it's the languages, to understand what's going to work, what's not going to work. But more and more, you're going to be reacting to, oh, great. In the same way, someone sends you an article, you send your editor your book. You're the writer, but they're the person who comes in and says, okay, great. I get this. Chapter 1 isn't quite working, or chapter 3 is, the hook's not quite there. So I think more, 15 years ago, the engineer would have spent all their time in the minutia of all the code, and then maybe at the end, and then the staff engineer comes in, or the principal engineer comes in, and kind of makes sure it all compiles and works well, etc. I think more and more the junior engineer's role is to do what today a staff engineer does, or maybe a principal engineer does, because you know what, getting from that 0 to 80% of the work done, what used to take 2 weeks might take 2 hours, but the details at the end still matter. And did it in fact deliver what I asked for? Did it in fact give me the outcome I wanted to do? And so I'm hopeful again it goes from hours and hours and hours of writing code to minutes and minutes of writing code, and potentially hours of kind of curating the code or editing the code, or making it even better. And so in the same way, I'm sure I'm curious, in your book writing, I would guess you've written books before. I would guess that when you wrote them before, it was a lot of writing and then some editing. Now I'm guessing it's a little less writing and tons of editing. Is that the right?
Yeah, that's generally, and I mean, there's also sort of the hive mind aspect to it too, which aligns with, I think, what a lot of software engineering teams go through. Where I obviously any writer, you write and then you edit. And particularly in a book context, I have a developmental editor at my publisher, and then there's a another editor, and so you've got three or four minds sort of providing feedback and layering and iterating and so on, in a copy editor who then kind of has their own inflections and so on. So it's there's certainly that kind of collaborative thing. And it's what you're proposing is actually this really cool idea, because it's a future where even if you're a junior developer, you have all this room freed up for creativity, where you can like ideate on new features as opposed to like getting kind of grinding down in the code. I mean, some people enjoy that, and that's totally fine. But
Sure.
it gives you, so I mean, potentially, the speed of development increases because you've got more brains thinking about kind of how to iterate
Well,
it forward.
I to your point, I mean, I think I kind of think in three phases. So we've been doers historically. We do work. The engineer does the work. Great. Now they're going to move to becoming an editor. We haven't talked about agents yet, but like as agents start to proliferate, and obviously they are already, then we're more like directing, because now you're almost like now that one engineer could be working with initially two or three AI agents to do who are doing work, but why not be working with 100 of them, or maybe those two or three are so powerful. So I guess my point being is like and this is broadening out from coding to any of us. I see a future where the most important skill in some ways is like, how do you direct these resources you have access to? As you know, at companies, they're called directors or they're called vice presidents. And like their main role is to kind of figure out, I lead a team of 30 people. How do I figure out the best way to resource my 30 people and set goals and work with them and etc. I actually think all the skills and processes and frameworks we've used to manage humans aren't that different than the ones we're going to use, at least initially, to manage agents. It'll just be a difference where now, most people at a company don't have 30 people working for them. By definition, they report to those people who do. In a world of agents, there's no reason, again, I don't know if it's a year out, or if it's 5 years out, but it's not 20 years out, to be clear. All of us want to have this access to, oh, I can supplement my own capacities and my own capabilities with these digital workers. And the same skills of, well, if I give you a digital worker tomorrow, you may not know how to use them. But the skill to know how do I get the most out of a digital worker or an agent is in some ways like the most important skill of the next, I don't know, 5 or 10 years, because that's going to be the reality very, very soon.
And that's a really fascinating idea, that everybody essentially becomes a manager, but not like a manager has ever existed before. Because a current manager, if you're managing human beings, your team of 15 or 30 or what have you, then you're applying your soft skills, your communication, your empathy, et cetera, to try to get the most out of everybody and ensure that you're kind of everyone's part of this harmonious whole. But if you have agents, I mean, obviously there's a need for clarity, and there's a need for sort of clear thinking about how everything's flowing and interacting with each other. Maybe less emphasis on soft skills, but I also know a lot of engineers who also say please and thank you whenever they're interacting with
Well,
their
I mean, to
chatbot. So
me,
there's that.
that's actually
Yeah.
that's in some ways the most is because I was thinking about this recently. So I met with someone last Friday, and they showed me an AI sales account executive doing a demonstration. So, for the audience, usually when you're buying a piece of business software, you'll get a demonstration from the rep, and they'll walk you through stuff. And so my initial reaction for the first 5 seconds was, this is weird. I'd much rather talk to a human than I talk to an agent. And I realized, actually, that's not true at all, because with a human, we have all these niceties. I'm talking right now, you're listening. We're going to, etc. There's a lot of just niceties. If you're talking to an AI agent, I could just be like, I only have two questions. Not interesting, not interesting, not interesting. So the efficiency with which you can get to information is so different when you take away some of those niceties. Like the same way the way you would manage 10 agents couldn't be more different than the way you might manage 10 people, because those 10 people have families, they have responsibilities. Like agents are like, no, wrong, timeout, completely wrong. But you couldn't do that with a human, because they would then, your trust is completely gone. So I think even just like how we interact with humans, there's this whole layer of relationships that are very, very important that kind of make us fundamentally human. What I don't know, and we'll figure out together, is how does that work now when you're working with digital workers? Obviously, I'd like to be, I use please with Claude. I use please with
Mhm.
ChatGPT. I do.
I do too. Yeah.
But I do occasionally, as I see the response, I'm like, oh, nope. I gave you a terrible prompt, because clearly
Yeah.
you're heading in the wrong direction. And obviously the difference with humans, like you feel so bad, like I just wasted 2 days of your life because I give you a bad product to do. With AI, you don't feel the same way. And so I think kind of it's so interesting to me of like how do you keep what's foundationally human about relationships, but it's also incredibly inefficient sometimes. And so how do you keep the best things of that, but then also get the benefit of like, you can just, I'll give you one more example. Often I'll say you're working on a presentation. I spoke with a consultant yesterday who works, with teams. They do consulting. And he was sharing with an agent, with AI now, he can go to version 41 of the presentation. He can tell you, not quite good enough, make it better. Not quite good enough, make it better. Not quite working. Like with a human, if he'd asked his junior analyst to do 41 revs of this piece of material, they would hate him forever, if it makes
Of
sense.
course, and it would take forever.
Just,
Yeah.
and so just like how you interact, and I think the directness with which you can interact with an AI agent or the digital worker is just so foundationally different than how you can interact with a human that we're going to all figure out together. But I think, there'll be less connection, but way more efficiency, if it makes sense. And
No,
so,
absolutely.
is that good or bad on net? I think there's a way it ends up being very good, but it's very, and I know it's different.
Yeah, and I think to a certain extent, obviously there's still, even as we get these agents online and so on, and they develop out these complex networks. I mean, there's still the need for kind of the human in the loop. I mean, you still gotta. I mean, to a certain point, I feel that there's still a need to understand like the workflows that the agents are enacting and so on, just to make sure that whatever the output is not, like to your point before, in terms of like sending off a human being to do something, like you need to know that what they're bringing back is correct. And so,
I
I mean,
think,
there's still that.
the analogy I like to use, it's not my analogy, but it's the analogy I like is, today, these agents or AIs, it's like a very, very, very capable intern where, it's summer, it's June, the interns show up at McKinsey or Bain or Goldman Sachs, whatever. Great. They're like bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. But they're not yet able to do good work unless they are told exactly what to do, because they don't actually know what they're doing yet. And so it's the same thing with AI. If you give really clear instructions, that's also where prompt engineering is a real skill right now. Because if I give a 8-word prompt, I'm not going to get back an amazing answer. If I put an hour in up front to give an incredibly rigorous prompt, in the same way I would if I were giving instructions to a team, I wouldn't be like, hey team, can you go do this? I'd say, hey, here's what I'd love to see. Here's what I'd like to see it. If you take the time up front to do it, then the difference becomes the team might take 2 weeks to come back to me and give me the great work. The AI might take 2 minutes. And so, but it's still, it seems weird now. Like I take an hour up front, I get output in 2 minutes versus I give the output, I give 2 minutes of work, then the team does 2 weeks of work, but it was wrong. And we've just wasted all this time. And so it's almost like the more prescriptive you can be up front, and to your point about human in the loop, the more you can then figure out, right now, agents and AI doesn't yet do an amazing job every time. In fact, they often don't. But then you iterate, you say, oh, great, this isn't working. And so I tweak it. It's kind of like, say when you write your stories, like I'm sure occasionally like, oh, this isn't, then you reread it, like, that's not working. How do you change this? And so it's kind of that constant, iterative deployment or iterative editing or whatever you want to call it. But like, but the nice about AI is because the throughput, the number of cycles can be so much higher. If I'm, again, back to that example of 41 iterations, if you were going to do that with a team, that might have taken 3 weeks, because every iteration, like a cool boss, I'll be back in 3 hours. Cool boss, I'll be back in an hour. With AI, every you give the prompt, it comes back in 10 seconds. And so you can you can speed through those 41 versions in 2 hours. Whereas with humans, A, they wouldn't want to do it because it would be so frustrating. But B,
Yeah.
even if they did, it would have taken you a month.
Yeah, and it's amazing. It's so I'm optimistic for it. I can't wait to have my own personal team of 40 agents running out about and doing all sorts of things. I mean, already, I mean, it's in terms of just the writing side of the process, in terms of like optimizing SEO content for the website and all these other things, and like digesting transcripts and the summaries and everything like that. I mean, there's so many things that for, and this goes beyond tech to pretty much every single facet of the economy, where all these things are saving money, and that's only going to increase with agents. So I mean, it's an exciting future in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I
So
mean,
that's what it
I
is.
think, again, I write, but I write, blog posts on LinkedIn, and
Mhm,
I write
mhm.
that kind of stuff. You obviously write books, but I can imagine a world where, hey, I know these are my first two chapters. And I know the characters will be at this point. Give me 10 different story arcs for where the story goes. And as you know, the beauty of AI is like 9 of them will be garbage, but one of them might be amazing. And the things they have, okay, I don't like these 10 are all bad. Great, give me 10 more. Like I use AI a lot for naming things and branding things. Right, give me 25. Great, these 2 are okay. The rest are terrible. I wouldn't say that quite that bluntly because they're great. Now give me 25 more like those 2. Great, and you can go from that first prompt to a really good output in 10 minutes because that's that cycle time, that throughput time, where with humans you're like, hey Nick, do you have any ideas? You're like, yeah, I'll get back to you tomorrow with some ideas. And then great, and then we just and the whole thing just took a week. With AI, the whole thing takes 10 minutes. And so again, as a writer, I mean, you could write a bad book in a day at this point. I know writing a good book takes a long time, but writing a bad book is the first part to me of writing a good book.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's true too. And then you iterate. So cool. This is a wonderful discussion. I love plunging into especially to the agent side of it. But this is great. Well, that was interesting. Here are some quick takeaways as you think through the best ways to deploy AI within your own organization. First, prioritize problem solving over tech adoption. Don't rush to integrate AI simply because it's the latest trend. Before implementing any AI solution, clearly define the specific business problem you're trying to solve. Conduct thorough workflow analysis and understand the desired outcome. This strategic approach ensures AI is used effectively and avoids wasted resources on any integrations that don't quite work. Second, continuously upskill and adapt to evolving AI landscapes. Recognize that the tech industry has a diverse range of AI proficiency. Whether you're a seasoned developer or a newcomer, you need to commit to continuous learning. Stay updated on the latest AI tools, methodologies, and advancements, and be prepared to adapt your skills and knowledge as the AI landscape evolves. Leverage training opportunities and engage the communities to bridge any knowledge gaps. Understand that embracing AI is a journey and that everyone is at a different place in that journey. Third, embrace AI as a tool for creative empowerment. See AI not as a job replacement, which sometimes can be hard to do, but as a powerful tool that enhances your capabilities. Leverage AI to automate routine coding tasks, freeing up time for higher-level strategic thinking and innovation. Focus on developing your editing and curating skills to refine AI-generated code. Anticipate a shift towards managing and directing AI agents, and begin developing the necessary skills for this future role. Most of all, it's critical to explore and experiment with AI-powered development tools in order to enhance your productivity and your creative output. Fourth, it's important to cultivate effective communication and interaction with AI. Everyone should recognize that interacting with AI agents is fundamentally different from working with humans. Embrace the efficiency and directness that AI offers while also understanding the importance of clear and precise communication. Mastering the art of prompt engineering to elicit desired outputs is really critical these days. Be prepared to iterate and refine your interactions with AI and continuously improve its performance within your organization. Understand that human insight remains crucial for ensuring the accuracy and effectiveness of AI-driven workflows. What does this mean? It means mostly practicing clear communication, understanding they'll be able to iterate much faster with AI than with humans. There's a lot more in that discussion, of course, so give it another listen if you feel so inclined. Thank you for joining us, and remember, Dice is your best resource to find the tech talent you need to fill your open roles, and for tech professionals, the best place to grow your tech career.